You say W every single day, but if you look at the letter, there's nothing U-shaped about it at all. 2 sharp points, 2 diagonal strokes. That is a double V. So why do we call it something completely different? The answer goes back 900 years to medieval monks copying manuscripts by hand, and a small scribal habit that accidentally froze the wrong name into the English language forever. To understand how W got its strange name, you need to picture Europe around the year 1000 AD. The Roman Empire had collapsed centuries earlier, but its alphabet had survived. Latin was the language of the church, of scholarship, of official documents. And that Latin alphabet, the one Rome had used for centuries, did not actually contain the letter W at all. Latin had a letter called V, and here's where things get complicated, because that Roman 5 did not sound the way our modern V sounds. In classical Latin, V represented a sound closer to the English W, so the Romans were, in a sense, already writing W sounds just with the letter V. But then the Germanic peoples of Northern Europe began converting to Christianity, adopting Latin script and writing down their own languages: Old English, Old High German, Old Norse. These languages had sounds that Latin simply had no letters for. One of the most pressing problems was the W sound, the voiced labiovelar approximant. It needed a symbol, and the solution the scribes came up with was messy, practical, and permanent. Sometime in the 7th century, Anglo-Saxon scribes working in England faced a specific problem. They needed to write Old English, a language full of that W sound. The runic alphabet they had used before, called the Futhorc, actually had a dedicated rune for this sound. It was called Win. For a while, scribes used Win in their manuscripts. You can find it in early Old English texts like Beowulf, copied around 1000 AD, where Win appears regularly in the text. But by the 10th and 11th centuries, a shift was happening. Scribes trained in the continental European tradition, working in places like the monastery at Winchester and the scriptorium at Canterbury, were increasingly familiar with the Carolingian style of writing. This style had no Win. It used only the letters of the Latin alphabet. So these scribes needed a workaround. The solution was simple. They wrote 2 U's side by side. In the script of the time, the letter U and the letter phi were not clearly distinguished. They were essentially the same symbol, often written with a rounded bottom in the middle of a word and a pointed bottom at the start. So when a scribe at Canterbury wrote the W sound, they would write VV or UU depending on their habit and the style of their hand. Then came 1066. The Norman conquest brought French-speaking scribes into England by the thousands. William the Conqueror's administration needed clerks, record keepers, and document writers. French scribes flooded into English monasteries and royal courts. French, like Latin, had no W sound and no letter for it. These Norman scribes encountered the Anglo-Saxon habit of writing VV or UU, and they needed to name this strange double-letter combination when they taught it or referenced it. The French scribes called it exactly what they saw. Double V in French would be double VE. But the Anglo-Saxon tradition they were working within had been writing UU, not VV. And the Old English and early Middle English speakers around them heard the name of this letter as W. The name that took hold in England was the English one because English speakers were naming a letter they had been writing as 2 U's, not 2 V's. Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing his Historia Regum Britanniae around 1136, was working in exactly this transitional period when Latin, French, and English scribal habits were colliding in English monasteries. While he did not write specifically about the letter W, his manuscripts represent exactly the kind of document produced in this chaotic post-conquest environment, where the spelling conventions of 3 languages were being negotiated simultaneously by scribes who had learned their craft in very different traditions. The name W was not a mistake in the sense of a single person getting it wrong. It was a collective habit, the organic result of Anglo-Saxon scribes writing UU and English speakers naming what they saw at a moment when the letter's form was not yet standardized. The most common thing people say when they notice this oddity is that English must have made an error, that the letter should be called double V, and that somewhere along the way someone got confused. Some people confidently point to French, where the letter W is indeed called double VE, as proof that the English version is the mistake. But that framing gets the history backwards. French speakers call it double V because their scribal tradition was writing 2 V-shaped characters. English speakers called it double U because their scribal tradition was writing 2 U-shaped characters. Both names were accurate descriptions of what those scribes were actually putting on the page. The difference reflects a genuine divergence in scribal practice, not an error in English. The letter's visual form eventually standardized toward the V-shaped version we use today, but the English name had already been spoken aloud by generations of teachers, priests, and students. By the time the printed form looked like a double V, the spoken name double U was already centuries old and impossible to dislodge. The ghost of this scribal history is still audible in languages around the world. In French, W is double V, diamanteme. In German, W is simply called V, because German W sounds like English Vi. In Spanish, W is called doble V, or sometimes double U. Desde, a split that reflects exactly which scribal tradition influenced each country's literacy practices. In Welsh, W is actually a vowel, not a consonant, which is a completely separate development rooted in how Welsh phonology evolved. Place names like Cwme and Crowde e Gardaid show W functioning as a vowel sound, a living reminder that letters are not fixed objects, they are tools shaped by the sounds communities need to represent. And in internet culture, the single letter W has become slang for win, used in gaming and social media, entirely divorced from its original double-letter construction. The letter has now traveled so far from its scribal origins that it has shed one of its two-component letters entirely. The story of W connects to a much broader pattern in the history of alphabets. Letters and their names drift apart over time, and the names often preserve older stages of the language like insects trapped in amber. Consider the letter H. In English, we call it H, a name that descends from the Latin ha and passed through French ache. The name carries no H sound in it at all. Or consider the letter Y, called Y, a name whose origins are genuinely obscure but which again tells us almost nothing about how the letter sounds. Alphabet names are historical artifacts, not phonetic descriptions. The story of W also connects to the larger history of V and U, which were a single letter in the Latin alphabet for centuries. The Romans used V for both the vowel sound in uber and the consonant sound in veil. The split into two distinct letters, U for the vowel and V for the consonant, did not stabilize in English printing until the early 1600s, which means that for most of the medieval period, W was the double of a letter that was itself doing double duty. The scribes who wrote UU were working with a symbol system that was genuinely ambiguous. They were not confused. They were being practical with imperfect tools, the same thing every writer and every culture does when a new sound needs a new symbol. Sometimes the practical solution sticks for 900 years. The 23rd letter of the English alphabet carries inside its name a complete social history. Roman letters meeting Germanic sounds, Anglo-Saxon scribes improvising with what they had, Norman administrators encountering a foreign habit, and English speakers naming what they saw rather than what they heard. Every time you say double U, you are quoting a medieval monk without knowing it. Visual. Final shot of a monk at a writing desk, quill in hand.